My name is Suzanna Hinkle, and I'm going to discuss the relationship between nuclear energy and the environment after having the unique opportunity to tour several nuclear waste and reactor facilities in France. Presently, many factors affect the design of a nuclear reactor, either from previous incidents or anticipation to prevent. Several of these factors include environmental phenomena like natural disasters. Flooding in areas near a nuclear reactor is particularly dangerous because it can cause important circuitry to short out in the reactor core ICP room. This loss of functioning circuitry leads to a station blackout, which is the loss of all AC electrical power, the most critical component of maintaining cooling systems. Tornado risks anywhere near a nuclear reactor site are a threat to the integrity of the building structure, which is the final containment mechanism of the reactor. The strong winds and tornado missiles of F4 and F5 classified tornadoes have the power to damage the reinforced concrete of the structure and threaten the cooling systems. Hurricanes also have the capacity to cut off the off-site power sources, which in turn also threatens the cooling systems. A major result of loss of cooling systems is core melt, fire hazards depending on what neutron moderator is used, and breach of primary boundary. Other natural disasters that prove dangerous to the safety of a nuclear facility include earthquakes, lightning, ice storms, and other winter conditions, droughts, and wildfire. As a result of several nuclear disasters caused by natural phenomena, NRC Safety Regulation 10 CFR 5063 was created so that protective and preventative measures could be planned in order to ensure the safety of the public in case of the loss of AC power. This regulation was passed in 1998 in response to the numerous occurrences where nuclear facilities have lost off-site power due to natural disasters or unforeseeable circumstances. The intent of this regulation is to ensure that the emergency power sources are viable and sufficient to support the cooling systems during a station blackout. The on-site emergency power sources must be able to operate at adequate power levels to maintain cooling systems for the expected duration of blackout. This duration of time is determined by the expected frequency of power loss, probable time needed to restore off-site power, and the reliability of power sources. Natural disasters can seriously compromise a reactor site, as seen most recently in the Fukushima nuclear disaster. When designing a nuclear reactor facility, the immediate and surrounding areas need to be considered as hazards, including common natural disasters, and must be taken into account. More and more, we're seeing that reactor design plans to protect against natural hazards such as those previously mentioned. While nuclear power plants regularly release 100 times less radioactive emissions than the coal industry, the potential for enormous radioactive release remains, and the buildings surrounding the reactor must be capable of containing any such incident. In order for a structure to completely contain nuclear material, the risks of the surrounding areas must be taken into account when building such a structure. All policies regarding the nuclear power industry in the U.S. aim to protect public health and safety and to protect and sustain the environment. Most policies and regulations are put in place by the NRC and the EPA. These policies make up the protocol for how uranium is mined and enriched, how fuel is fabricated, how the reactor is operated, how the used fuel is stored, reprocessed, and disposed of, as well as how the waste is treated after each of these steps. The EPA regularly monitors radiation releases near nuclear facilities in order to protect the environment and surrounding populations to the fullest extent. The Blue Ribbon Commission was formed in 2010 to examine the nuclear waste system in the U.S. The group's final report, released in 2012, recommended the creation of a new organization to handle the disposal of a nuclear waste site. This new organization should be responsible for designating and commissioning an acceptable location of a facility for storage of high-level radioactive waste and other levels. The nuclear fuel cycle, like all other energy cycles, produces waste at every step of the cycle. Starting at the uranium mines, waste is produced when separating the uranium from other material, called tailings, which are then buried with the liner to separate it from the environment. The enrichment process produces depleted uranium, which has various uses in the U.S. military. The waste produced from the fuel fabrication process is treated to reduce any radioactivity and toxicity and is permanently disposed of in storage. The radioactive waste from used fuel is classified in the listed categories in order to properly store in a manner that protects the public. Currently in the U.S., there is no system of storage other than the spent fuel pools that are constructed of steel-reinforced concrete and a sufficient amount of water that cools the heat produced and acts as a shield from radiation that is emitted. Radioactive gas is released in small amounts in the effluents that are released from power plants, which has a minimal environmental effect. For example, populations in a 50-mile radius of a nuclear power plant would be exposed to 0.1 microsieverts per year, which pales in comparison to the 260 microsieverts per year that the average person living by the sea is exposed to. The most widely known threat of nuclear power is a nuclear meltdown, the ramifications of which would devastate the environment and nearby populations. While there are numerous measures designed to prevent a meltdown, it's always a possibility due to human error. A meltdown usually consists of core melt, that is, the nuclear fuel melts, and always includes core damage due to the failing of regular and emergency cooling systems. At a full meltdown, the core overheats and the molten core material escapes containment. The real hazards are possible steam explosions, reactor structure and technology damage, and significant release of radioactive material. Another widespread fear regarding nuclear power plants is explosive attacks and sabotage. Attacks have occurred in the past, which compromised the surrounding environments and threatened the safety of the nearby populations. These attacks have not occurred in the U.S., but after 9/11, tougher security measures and building reinforcements were established, as well as a stricter reactor licensing screening process. The effect of an attack on fuel pools would be catastrophic, because fuel pools are not typically as protected as the reactor structure, and especially don't have all of the containment systems that the core has. Fatal amounts of radioactivity would be released in the case of either structure being invaded by missile or sabotage. Reactor design has evolved alongside of the occurrences of many nuclear incidents. What has developed the most are the containment systems centered around the core, which is the biggest threat. Additional protection measures include the containment system within the core, now called a core catcher, which is designed to trap and contain molten core material that also functions to cool the material. It has now determined that fuel pools, which are now particularly susceptible to malicious attacks, must be able to withstand natural disasters and malicious attacks, which would threaten the structural integrity of the pools. Security measures for both the nuclear reactor structures and spent fuel pools have been increased to avoid sabotage attacks from the inside. With smarter reactor design, reliable emergency power sources, advanced plans for emergencies, conscious waste management techniques, and regular monitoring, the nuclear industry does an excellent job of protecting the public health and safety and the environment. Included are the additional references used in the creation of this presentation. I'd like to thank Dr. Cole for making this study abroad trip possible, and to Cijelek for making this trip an excellent educational experience.